And no DUI from this?
So I've already had 2. I've had like 2
we just breezed past that real quick.
Those were
small potatoes.
Those were like non.
Millie makes songs, hey, I made this one. Jerry builds bikes and they go real fast. They're mental defectives.
Welcome to the Mental Defectives podcast, a show where we interview interesting individuals with a focus on addiction and mental health. I'm your host, Millie Graham. That's Millie if you know me, Mr. Graham if you owe me. Joined, as always, by the Hogwarts of Harleys, the gearhead with the heart of gold. It's Mr. Jerry with a G.
Glad to be here.
And today...
Hold on. Hit that like and subscribe button if you dig what we're doing.
And check us out wherever you get your social media, Mental Defectives Podcast, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. We are there, Mental Defectives Podcast. Check us out because today we have a very special guest. So special, in fact. Mm-hmm. He is a sober biker Buckeye. You can catch him fellowshipping all the way from Bexley to the Badlands and back. He's got the cleanest beard on 2 wheels. Please welcome Ben. Ben, how's it going?
Great. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
You are welcome, sir. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, where do you want to start?
Where are you from?
So originally I grew up, born in Toledo. Family moved here when I was really young, and we moved to the Grandview area back in like 82, 83 when I was going into the 3rd grade. Grew up in the northwest side of Columbus between Grandview and Arlington, and I have been in Ohio ever since.
Hell yeah. And then when was the first drink?
First drink would have been way back before we moved to Columbus. We lived in Lima, and it was the typical sip on Dad's beer. It was a Lowenbrow with a nice scripted lion with a gold flake and blue bottle, and but it was just a couple sips. But oddly, I always describe my first drink because it was a little weird that I went the next day after a few sips of beer, went to the bus stop in kindergarten and acted drunk to get attention from my friends. Like the whole trip to school in the bus, at the bus stop, and then rolled into the rest of my day. Why I acted like that and that was my natural reaction, only God knows.
It's definitely not something you would have seen else.
No,
it's just like that internal
not.
thing that like we have that like
internal creativity as a kid. Drinking equals getting attention.
Yeah.
So there you have it.
And then when did drinking like start to pick up for you?
So they're like in the 1st grade. No.
Rolling into 3rd grade, I smoked crack for the first time. I shot my first man in 5th grade.
No, we moved to Columbus, and it was really that middle school era. My family moved from Grandview to Arlington, and in between that time, my mom was at Ohio State. I've got 2 younger sisters, so she raised 3 kids by herself, going to OSU full-time and working full-time. And so that created, when we talk about this whole Gen X, just free-range kids, that's when it started in middle school. I can remember the first real drunk being, me and my friends found a 12-pack of Bud Light bottles. You know, like you can still picture the 12-pack, and it was sitting in between the sidewalk and the grass and a car in Grandview, like on a Saturday morning, and we were just doing, kid things, going through the neighborhood. Saw it and intuitively knew that you needed to take that and hide it and drink it somewhere where nobody could see you. Like, nobody needed to explain that to us, that we needed to be hiding our drinking as a teenager. And from that point forward, it was as often as we possibly could during the summer, which almost was like every day. And then during the school year, it was on the weekends. I didn't really dabble too much. My rest of my friends all dabbled into smoking pot and following the Dead. I just stuck to my ripped up jeans, black concert t-shirt, and AC/DC and Metallica, and kept on going.
None of that hippie shit for you.
Right. Hell yeah, metal.
No. So that's just the way I grew up. And then going from that, like, I had to go to boarding school for a year and a half.
Where was that at?
All the way up in Ashtabula County, Austinburg, Ohio. It really spawned from the fact that my drinking was getting out of control. The guys I was running around with were getting a little bit more seedier. It was one thing when you're running around with the suburban kids in the neighborhood, but then once you creep on, being in Columbus to the west side and some those guys filter in, it becomes a little bit more unacceptable.
A little dicey.
A little dicey as far as what the behaviors and stuff. And so one of the major events growing up as a kid is after my parents divorced, my dad was doing the weekend dad thing, and there was a drunk driver coming down the wrong way down 315 on a Friday after he had just picked up me and my sisters to take us back up to Toledo to do the weekend dad thing. And so there was a drunk driver that hit us head on. I was in the passenger seat right next to him. He died.
Oh my God.
That day, and and it's it's weird because I go through the same area every day almost for the rest of my life because it's right in the hospital curve on 315, and there before Riverside, and so I was in a body cast for the next couple of months. Was in a leg cast after I got out of the body cast, and so that really like affected my character defects, so to speak, when we talk about recovery. Like I felt like I lost my childhood because of that and some other stuff, so I felt entitled to act reckless and carefree. And but once I got through high school, I was tired of disappointing my mom. I had a lot of resentments, some other stuff behind the scenes had gone on, but I wanted to just quit being a disappointment because I knew that what I was doing wasn't right, but at the same time I just wanted to grow up. And so I saw all my normal friends, or not even friends, but like the normal people in an Upper Arlington high school, what did they do? And I'm trying to mimic this behavior, and they go off to OU. Well, I'm like, okay, I'll go off to OU, clean myself up, put on a nice button-up shirt, and clean myself up, and
I'll go to the weed-smoking central of Ohio to clean
I
myself up.
Swear to God, sight unseen, never gone to a Halloween party, anything down there before in my life. And when go ahead.
I just want to backtrack on the so your father passes. You're in the body cast for how many months?
So like 3 months. So this is like fifth grade elementary school era.
Okay. And then your sister was also in the car?
I've got two twin sisters. They were in the back and just bumps and bruises.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they didn't have to go through any of that. To give you like how much of a young budding alcoholic I was at that time in fifth grade, it happened later in the fall, so your first quarter of school, and I had already had enough like negative check marks on the chalkboard with my fifth grade teacher that I had after school detention for like almost the rest of the year already. Now, mind you, that same fifth grade teacher then, after early recovery and still in the body cast, would come every day after school, after he's done with school, and come and catch me up so I didn't fall behind. He would spend like an hour or so with me, and so there was always that close relationship with him after that. But I was already young, obnoxious, and just out of control. But fortunately, the big fortunate thing for me was it was all misdemeanor-ish, obnoxious behavior. There aren't any later stories of robbing banks, holding people up, breaking into houses, fortunately, yet.
Yeah.
So I go to OU, and they quickly, after 2 quarters in college, they're like, "That drunk and stupid's no way to go through life, son. I've got a 0.72 grade point average. I was a really good student going through high school in the sense that I could just show up and didn't ever have to study and get the grades. I could get good grades. during the senior year when I had senioritis and I wasn't going to class but 3 days a week out of 5, I was still passing enough to get into college. And for the first time now, there's something wrong. Like, I could look at a book and read a paragraph or a page and then not recall what I just read. I couldn't focus. Some people would probably diagnose it, like ADHD or something like that. I was just really restless, irritable, and discontented, and didn't know how to describe that. I didn't know that that's what was going on unless I was around my friends. And it didn't even have to be drinking, but I had to have some sort of social security blanket, and OU was an awesome place for that. I could treat that, but then I come back home after being kicked out of school.
How much were you drinking at school?
I was probably drinking still at that point in time, binge drinking, just a college binge drink.
Yeah.
College binge drinker. Occasionally during the week, nothing regular. It would just be spur of the moment if it was. But it was definitely dedicated drinking come Friday. And I always describe it as the hardest period of time for me at that time was the 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock hour on the weekends, because normal kids don't crave to drink at 3 o'clock. They're trying to get their work done so that they can do what they want on the weekend. I want to start right now. I want to rock right now.
Yep.
And so to hold on and not drink by yourself, because you drink by yourself, you're an alcoholic. So that was always the most difficult time in my early 20s, was that Friday 3 o'clock.
And you were having these thoughts at that time of I can't drink by myself because
I was
have a
always
problem,
frustrated. At the time, I was like, oh, they're doing it somewhere. They're just not including me. You always have that anxiety of you not being involved in something. And I look back now, I'm like, nobody cared.
Right.
It wasn't exclusionary. It's just your magnificent magnifying mind taking one little small problem and making it a much bigger problem. And but eventually, I fast forward through this because I bounce back and forth between school. I come back for academic probation, go to Columbus State, and take some classes, and don't really say anything. I think I even tried to go to Ohio State for a quarter at the time because we were still on quarters, and then end up reapplying to go back to OU, go to OU for another year, do all right, try to buckle down and just maintain and be responsible. And I accidentally slept through a midterm. And the professor wouldn't let me retake it. It wasn't through any, nefarious, oh, he was out partying, blah, blah, blah. It was just simply, I'm in my early 20s, overslept, missed the exam, and then had no mercy from them. And so I failed that class, and I needed to graduate my GPA to a certain point at the end of that year, and failing that class obviously kicked that out from happening. So the cycle then is it's happening over and over. And every time I try, I fail. And I don't know how to deal with that. And I'm not talking to anybody about it, because who do you talk about? You're in your 20s, so you talk about problems like that. And I didn't have anybody. And I really thought it was just me. Why can't you grow up? Why can't you, overcome this or learn or just have left foot, right foot, and just accomplish something? Because it's not happening. And so I go back home. I had worked in the restaurant business during this time as a line cook throughout late high school, early college years, your summer jobs and stuff like that. Yeah. And that's what I did for the next 2 years. And that was really my everyday drinking period. And I lived in, here's your sign. If you live in mom's basement in your early 20s, and she's even afraid to go into her own basement, because I worked second shift as a line cook, go to the bar with all the regulars that you worked with, and it was just this whole social atmosphere of, however you want to start it, but wake up, go to work, go to the bar, stay at the bar even after it closes because you're a regular, and then get home at 4, 5, 6 in the morning, go to bed, and rinse, lather, and repeat. And here's another sign. If you can't make it to your job on time and you don't have to be there until 5 p.m., you might have a problem.
Yeah.
So
And still just drinking during this time. There's no like
no, nothing else.
Peruvian marching powder going on, or
I was always afraid of that scene. Like we were joking around about listening to the Grateful Dead and, and the hippies and stuff. I was always around that, but I was afraid of it because I was like, I already know there's something going on here, but I didn't want to be that bad.
You didn't want to be that.
I didn't want to be that.
Yeah.
So it was always around, especially in the restaurant business. At the time, I am of an age before the whole opioid epidemic. So at that time, the party drug was cocaine, and then eventually a little bit further on, it was ecstasy, and the rave scene, and I was a little bit too old for that. But then I ended up, a high school friend of mine really comes knocking on my door one day, and he's like, hey, you want to go to this party? And it was a bunch of Ohio State kids who were all water skiers. And it wasn't, he's just like, he didn't go to college straight out of high school. He waited. His family had a business. It was real successful. He didn't really need to go and do that. And so he took what kids call a gap year. Yeah. And then he found these people because he was a water skier and grew up that way. I'd never water skied in my life, but I can certainly sit on a boat and drink. And so,
Sure.
So he showed up one day and introduced me to them, and somehow in my life at that point in time, I went from living in mom's basement to getting a regular union job working second shift at a plant out east. It was the old AT&T plant, and which at one point in time was like the largest employer in Columbus back in the 70s and 80s. And got a job there with union benefits. They were paying for school. I got out of mom's basement. I'm living with all these kids, and then it was on the heart of Fraternity Row on 15th Avenue at OSU, and like my life changed rapidly within a few months, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna overcome now. I'm gonna be able to pay for my own school. I'm gonna be able to live on my own. I'm gonna be able to go to school, and I'm gonna be able to participate in like other extracurricular activities that are like legitimate, good, and wholesome, and it's what you write home to your parents about. Life's great, and that lasted about 2 years. And what really happened was I learned how to drop classes before I failed them. And by the end of it all, I legitimately was probably, I joke about it, but it's serious. Like I was a 5th year freshman in college.
Yeah.
Like I didn't tell OSU about OU or Columbus State about any of those credits, because if they looked at that, they wouldn't have ever let me in. And so I would just show up saying, hey, you accepted me out of high school. Can I come? And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. Come on in. Check clears. It's fine. And so...
As long as that check clears, they'll take you.
Well, there's a story about that. Like I went through a whole quarter at Ohio State where I filled out the paperwork wrong for reimbursement from my employer, and was too afraid once I realized the mistake on how to fix it or what did I do wrong. And I don't know what I was thinking, but I went through and BS'd my professors because they're like, your name dropped off the roll. And I said, oh, I filled out this paperwork wrong. It'll come back and they'll work on it and fix it. And I went through and literally, I think I failed every class that semester, but it didn't matter because I was never a student to begin with. Like, how do you fake your way through a whole quarter of college classes where the professors let you in and sit there and take the exams, and they've got to do the work of grading your exams and your homework? And they're like, yeah. And I didn't realize that until I got sober and I went back to Ohio State, and I'm like, I wonder what those grades were and like whether or not I get credit and will it count against me and do I have to retake the classes to make up the grade? And it was like, it wasn't even there.
Wasn't even there.
Like, it just, I'm like, that's just bizarre. So, all right. I'm rambled on, so where do you want to redirect me?
Okay, so you're living on frat row. You got the union job, drinking. Where do we go from here?
So, this is when I didn't know this term about going on a mission until I got into recovery. And we have a water ski tournament where there's a bunch of collegiate teams all across the U.S., but in the Midwest is who we competed against. So, like, your Indiana schools, Ball State, Michigan, like the MAC schools in Michigan, the MAC schools in Ohio, OU, and stuff like that. And so it's our weekend to host a tournament up in Delaware, and we're at a hotel where we're running registration and everybody's staying at. And everybody that I know that I've met over the past couple of years, there's no other place to be, right? Like, this is what you've been living for, working towards. These are your favorite people in the world, your favorite drinking buddies. Like, you don't have anywhere else to be but here. And by the end of the first night, Friday night, I take off. And I don't know why. And I don't remember it. And people tell me about me taking off and doing donuts in the parking lot and just acting the fool and trying to get attention. And I'm heading down 23 towards like Old 315 through that Delaware area that transitions back into Worthington. And I end up, and I don't recall doing this, but I don't know why I would have been there, but I think I miss the entrance to Old 315 because I'm going south on 23, and then I take a left by where the Dodge dealership is now, and I go down that road, and at some point in time I veer off the road and I hit a telephone pole. This is all in a blackout. I don't remember any of it. And after hitting the telephone pole, I've literally put my head through the windshield, impacted the steering wheel. Luckily, didn't break any bones, but I've got glass. I've got glass I'm picking out of my forehead for like the next, over a week, next 2 weeks, and so you know what it's like anytime you cut anywhere on your head, it's profusely blood. It's not stopping, and I've done this all over my face. And this young couple comes up and Honda, and they're like, "Are you all right? Is there anything we can do?" And I'm like, I don't know why I remember this. I tell them, I'm okay. I'm got blood all over me.
As you're
Yeah,
spewing blood
right.
and glass
Yeah,
out of
like
your
fucking
face.
horror story.
Okay.
Yeah.
The only problem here is I've got a stick shift, and it's an Isuzu Amigo. It's like a Jeep. And when I put it in reverse, the engine dies. Like, I can start it, but as soon as I try to put it in gear, I can't get off the telephone pole. And fortunately, the telephone pole didn't like fall over, break, and like crush the vehicle. I just had impaled it, and it was still staying there. And that's the last thing I remember. Next thing I remember, I wake up and I'm coming to in the brownout or whatever, in the emergency room in Delaware, the hospital there, and the nurses are trying to clean me up, doctors stitching me up, and the highway patrol's over here, and he doesn't take me away, so I think I'm getting off, but I mean, he's leaving me with tickets. I don't, I'm like, oh, I don't have to go to jail tonight. And I think I'm being the life of the party. Like, I showed up that night with a whole full hand of Jose Cuervo and a case of Natural Light, like good college drinking, and they're just giving me the Al-Anon scowl. Like, I don't recognize the Al-Anon scowl. Like, I think I'm being charming, humorous, flirtatious, and they're just like, we see this all the time, and you're killing yourself. And I don't come to and have that realization until they're done cleaning me up, and they say, do you have anybody you can call?
Right.
like deadpan. Like they're done with me. Like they're not like offering me a ride home or anything. And that's when like the somber just comes right over your face, and you're like, I gotta make this phone call again. I gotta call mom. I gotta call mommy to come pick me up after another one of my disasters.
Yep.
And
no DUI from this?
so I've already had two. I've had like
Oh,
two
we just breezed past that real quick.
Those were
Small
like
potatoes.
those were like non-story. So this is my third, and it's happened again, like just like failing out of school again, and why can't I just grow up?
Hey, Mental Defectives.
Would you like to advertise on our podcast?
If so, email us at mentaldefectivespodcast@gmail.com.
So we can help you make a lot of money.
A whole lot of money.
I got to go through and get the lawyer, and to mitigate circumstances, because clearly, I'm guilty, but it's just about like, can I get the least possible amount of time? And so I do my 30 days in jail in Delaware. They offered an ankle monitor after that for 30 days, and I said, well, can I do treatment instead? And they said yes. Just because I didn't want to, like, it was a stigma thing. I didn't want to wear an ankle monitor.
Yeah.
And I go to treatment, and it wasn't to go to treatment to get sober, because they gave us, like some recovery literature, and they said, take it, like the first weekend, take it home, read it, and see what applies. And I go to the part in this literature about, if you're not thoroughly convinced, why don't you try some controlled
drinking? Yeah.
And they didn't like it that I tried that, and it was like, and I at the time, I was just a binge drinker, so like, I could do that.
Right.
Like I wasn't like the phenomena of like I would always go back to drinking, and eventually, if you allowed me, my preference was to drink without any control. But at the time, I still had some sort of physical control. I just didn't know 9 times out of 10, like it would be okay. It's the 1 time out of 10 that you really don't have any control of. So that was where I was at in that progression of things.
Sure.
And they're like, no, you're in treatment. You're not supposed to be drinking while you're in treatment. Like, I don't know how you missed that on the brochure when you came here. But I do remember, like, the other odd thing is, like, when you go to an admissions setting for a recovery center and you're trying to get in, and, like, I'm thinking in my head, how much what do I tell them so that they're convinced enough that they let me in, because I got to do this for court, but not so much so that they keep me. And you're playing this juggling game and balancing in your head of what to say, when to say it, how they physically react, and their tone and inflection, so that you can manipulate this thing to do it the way you want to do it. And you might have a problem with drugs and alcohol if you've had that experience in your life.
Right.
And so, but that was the beginning of the end, really. Some other life events happened, but more like on the outside. I go through and do all that, and I start going to meetings after I get through treatment because I had to. And then a couple months later, my grandfather is about to pass away. And it was my dad's dad, so I lost my dad obviously early on, and we talked about that.
Right.
He was an only child. My grandmother on that side had passed away. They lived up north in the Fremont area in Ohio, and my grandfather was at the very end of his life in a VA home in Sandusky. He was a World War II vet, and had a partial stroke and lost control, use paralysis of his left side. And now he was getting to the point where he wasn't really eating that much, and they knew that there wasn't much that they could do after that point.
Yeah.
And so we got to reestablish that relationship for a couple months, me and my sisters, because we kind of had a falling out after my dad had passed away, and my parents had already divorced about 5 years earlier. There wasn't that much connection, but your grandparents are always your grandparents, and you're always when you walk into the room as a grandkid, your grandparents' eyes are going to light up.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to light up, and it doesn't matter what's going on in the world. So he's about to pass away, and I have this just innocent next right thing thought of, okay, now you can go back to college full time. He was a retired factory worker. I knew he was going to get a little bit, or in my mind, I knew I was going to get a little bit of money, an inheritance, and that the next right thing to do is just finally graduate college. Let's just get it done and move forward. And then the next thought was, and it was a holy is not the right word, but it was just a wholesome thought, but a bad thought at the same time, is like, Ben, if you do this, you will end up just like you did when you showed up for college, with car keys in one hand and a bottle of booze in the other, and you're going to go back to road tripping and drinking and just doing whatever you want at some point in time. If you left unchecked, this is what's going to happen.
The Mental Defectives podcast is brought to you by Milligram's new EP, More is Always Better. 6 electrifying tracks available on all streaming platforms.
Been coming around 12-step recovery for a while, and knew that now, like, I had just been investigating for the time being, that I had to get sober. Mm-hmm. And then that's what led to my recovery starting in May of 99. So.
And so all that time, you never transitioned into like a daily drinker?
No, like the only time, like I said, when I got kicked out of school the second time from OU.
Oh, just when you were,
you were the line
second
cook.
shift line cook.
During those 2 years of living in mom's basement.
Sure.
And occasionally, like, this is how bad it was, is that on occasion, I would stop drinking on Mondays and still go to the bar and drink orange juice at the bar because I didn't know what to do otherwise. Like, this was my whole social life.
That's your whole life.
Yeah.
There's
Your
Makes
whole
sense.
So when I went back to Ohio State, like, this was gonna be like, okay, like, we're gonna get out, we're gonna break this cycle.
Yeah.
And then as well as I tried to do it, as much as I tried to white knuckle it and try to control it, it still ended up the same way.
Yeah. It's always interesting to me because I was always like a daily drinker and user, and that like, I don't know how much longer it would have taken me to get sober had I just been like the binge, because I feel like then it's easier to convince myself like, oh, maybe it's not that bad. Like, it was just like a rough 10 days and then I don't drink for a week or whatever. Like, okay, so you get sober in 99. What's that early sobriety looking like?
It's a roller coaster.
Yeah.
So I was all
And we
over.
finally graduated college at this point.
No. that hero story doesn't come until much later. But I try to continue on as a college student, and what I found was, now that I'm not quote unquote medicating with alcohol, like, my emotions are all over the place.
Oh yeah.
There's some other trauma that I didn't mention, that is stuff that don't need to go into with this, but like, I'm all over the place with feeling good one minute, feeling bad the next, waking up some mornings, don't want to deal with the world and just throw the covers over my head and not have to deal with what's outside that door. And the only relief I get is from going to 12-step meetings. And so, when I'm there, and it goes back to the whole thing now, back to the same problem before, is the 3 o'clock problem. The middle of I can go to a 12-step meeting at noon and feel good and get my court slip signed, because I got to do that still. I'm without my license, obviously, for a little bit of time. And I got to do the blow and go machine on the car once I finally do get privileges. But, during that early sobriety time, like, you go to that noon meeting and get a little relief, and then you go to the evening meeting, but that time in between, like that euphoria of being around a meeting wears off, and then from like 3 to 5, I'm restless, irritable, and discontented, and I can't even sit in my own living room and watch TV and be okay with that.
Yeah.
Like, I can't deal with these emotions, and with college classes, it was the same thing. So I had created the tsunami effect with Ohio State and finally failed out, and then went to Columbus State to improve my grade point average. And then there was times when I would get A's in classes, and there was times I'd fail classes. And it was because of the inconsistency and the emotional roller coaster. And it was also just a lack of maturity, because all it took was, I don't like this professor. And it would justify not going to class.
Sure.
And it would justify my character defects in that class. Like, it wasn't because I wasn't smart. It's just because I thought I was smarter than you. Like,
Right.
I don't need you. Yeah. So self-destructive behavior. And so that baffled me even more. I'm like, why is this happening? Like, I'm sober now. This shouldn't be happening. And then I kind of just like quit trying as far as school. I'm like, I'm just going to get a regular job and just plug away. That I know I can do. Like, I can suit up and show up, and I just need something normal for a period of time. And then things started to gradually work out. But even then, like, one of the first steps out of that was getting a commission job. And so to go back in the Wayback Machine before the mortgage crisis, you used to be able to, one of my jobs was as a mortgage originator, and I was working with a bunch of guys. You can talk to people, so just talk to people. And you could call up people or send them a letter, and they would call you, and they would give you your credit information over the phone. And, you know, you could do a whole credit app and social security number and everything. And we would refinance their houses and cash out all this equity because they had all this credit card debt, and then wipe that away, and then they have it rolled up in an installment loan. This is all legit and everything. But these people, and I'm one of them, like, I'm bad at spending money. The one thing I've learned in sobriety is how to acquire debt as opposed to pay off debt.
Sure.
But yeah, so that was right before the mortgage crisis, when they'd hand out mortgages just about anybody. And but it was a straight commission job. And I was still in early sobriety and didn't like opening the mail. And what comes in the mail? Bills come in the mail.
Yes, they do.
And so I would have a lot of money one week and no money the next week. And so I was still all over the place. It took me a while in early recovery, like I'm talking years in early recovery, just to balance that out and just have that experience I was always looking for, of like left foot, right foot. And but nothing in recovery has been linear. It's always been a roller coaster. And it's always gotten the wave has always generally gone up, but there's definitely been some demon drops, so
Sure.
to speak.
Sure. What do you think helped the most with leveling all of that out?
Just consistency and showing up every day.
Yeah.
Like, there's not a magic, in my story, there wasn't a magic bullet to it.
Fair.
I know around the 10-year mark, I finally found a group of like-minded people in recovery that have been sober much longer than I. And we started talking about our character defects and our character defects in recovery and sobriety. Like, we all kind of knew that this wasn't parts of our lives. And like I said, most of the stuff in my life has always been obnoxious level, not like felonious level, but like, why won't this stuff go away? And why am I not growing up in certain areas of my life? And going through that process with that group of men really changed the rest of my recovery, where it gave me hope. Whereas the first 10 years, I had hope when I first got sober, and then quickly after having some sort of confidence in my physical sobriety, but then realizing I've got other issues with like paying bills and being consistent at work and just being consistent in all areas of my life. And but we're just going to hide that. We're just going to show up to our recovery meetings and look the part and keep on doing that. But it was just like you said, you ask like what got you through that. It was just left foot, right foot stuff.
Yeah.
Like not giving up. And And I really didn't even think really about giving up, because one of the things for me was like I had like this I don't want to say traumatic, like this drama in like at like a 2-3 year point in my recovery, where I thought I was going to get kicked out of the 12-step fellowship. Because I put my hand in the cookie jar.
Yeah.
It was all my doing. And I had that thought, like, I'm not going to drink again, but suicide's an option. Like, and like, and not that I wanted to.
Right.
It was just like,
But that's the thing.
drinking wasn't even fathomable. Like, either I need to figure this problem out, or it's a permanent solution. And I don't want the permanent solution, but for whatever reason, using wasn't even an option. Like,
Yeah.
so it was just keep on going and figuring it out. And I got through it. Then towards after that 10-year mark, things got a little bit better, and then the college experience happens. Then the OSU experience happened. And I was fortunate to be able to go back to Ohio State, and I can still remember the first academic advisor I talked to at Ohio State when I tried to get back in. And I do all the research of getting all my documents and all my college records together and all one nice neat stack, and finally get to the right advisor, because I think I talked to some office at first and like, what are you trying to do? Like, you were a student way back when, what? And you're trying to do what? And you want to get what degree? Like, what are you trying, like, and I'm just trying to clean up the wreckage of the past. I don't have like this, like,
Fair.
I want to be a chemical engineer. Like, I know this in my heart. Like, I just know that I want to come back and just be able to help people. And so I end up in the College of Social Work, but at first I'm like, I got to clean up all this before I even get to that. And I show up with all those records, and the academic advisor looks at me and he's like, what did you do? And literally, the only way I can explain it in an analogy, it's like dating 3 women and never telling them each other about it, and then they find all about it at once. And that was that moment, with showing up to that academic advisor with 3 different sets of college transcripts, and like, how do I put this all together? How do I figure this out? Yeah, how do I put these credits together towards a degree, and what can I do? Can I even come back?
Right.
And that was an exciting time. It was also a frustrating time. And fortunately, I go back to Columbus State, reestablish my grade point average. And they let me back into Ohio State. And then once I get to Ohio State, unbeknownst to me, was also the same time of, if you remember Sarah Nerad,
CRC, the Collegiate Recovery Community or something.
Yeah. So it was at the very beginning of that. And so OSU was having this whole, like, we're going to support students that are in recovery, whether, they're a returning student like me, or they're just an 18-year-old student that just showed up freshman year and is showing signs of a problem. And so there was a whole community within the college that you could plug into. And it was neat to be a part of that, establishing that, because we were the first. And so that was a neat experience that got me and made me feel like I'm in the right place. Like, it would have been really easy, because I can remember sitting in one of those like introductory college sessions that they require you to do, and we're in the main library, and it's really about how to use the main library, because it's like huge building. If you've ever been to Ohio State, it's like,
yes,
I don't want to say skyscraper, but I mean, like, it has that daunting effect. Like, how do you use this building? How do you find all these documents and do your research? And it's not Chat GPT. So we're sitting in this, this like 1 hour session of how to use the library, and the librarian's talking about like how to do research on 9/11, and they're asking all these kids, and all these kids, 9/11 for them, they were like in elementary school.
Right.
And I can remember as an adult where I was at, because I was working at that mortgage company, going down to the main post office. Like, so it would have been easy during that time period to feel different than.
Oh, yeah.
And,
No doubt.
And I never did. And I got to go through graduation and finally graduate from college in 2015. And the only thing that I can say, though, is that, like, out of that whole experience, it just cleaned up the wreckage of the past. I don't work in that career in social work. I got a bachelor's in social work. Had worked 10 years in that. Had worked in a lot of different freestanding private hospitals that we're all probably pretty familiar with, where at the time you could have a treatment wing within that hospital, but you had to have some other diagnosis in order to get in, because they weren't just letting you into the hospital just so that you could
Sober up.
You had
You had to have some sort of mental
underlying
Yeah,
depression,
gotcha.
untreated
Sure.
anxiety.
Right.
Otherwise, they were getting rid of you within the 3 days. And then for me, and this is just personal to my story, is I had done that for so many years, and since all those hospitals then had psych wings, and I'm a pretty big guy, I would end up over on the psych wing, staffed over there, because you've got little old nurses and psych patients.
Yeah.
And what I found after going through school and been doing this for like 10 years, I was burnt out. I really had signs of PTSD. I still have signs of PTSD from that. And
So they brought you over there as like the muscle?
yeah, I mean, like, you're not going to have, so you have what are called code violets in a hospital.
Yeah.
And you need, in order to do the least restrictive, and I totally believe in the system that's set up, but you just need to go hands-on for a certain amount of time so that they can medicate, so that they don't have to put patients in restraints.
Yeah.
You know, we're not going back to the old sanitariums and
Not like some
just
Shutter Island
Yeah.
style.
Yeah,
and
right.
just strap them down to a bed and just leave them there
Yeah.
for days and weeks on end.
Yeah.
Like, you want them to be able to have the least restrictive environment and have the least traumatic environment, but you still have to calm them down during their crisis. So you just have to be able to strategically go hands-on with these patients so that you can just apply holds so that they're safe, everybody else is safe, they get medicated, and then, but you do that enough, and that's your everyday job to do that. Like, it took a toll. I didn't realize it at the time, and I realized.
Yeah, I mean, if you're
I'd
putting
imagine.
a motherfucker in a chokehold while someone
Well,
hits him
no,
with some
you're not.
Thorazine while they're screaming about Satan coming to repossess their butthole or something, like...
yeah, I mean, there are stories like that where some lady was trying to impregnate me. Like, I was gonna be pregnant.
Hell yeah.
Or one of the other staff. Like, that was her delusion. But, you know, like, in all fairness, like, there's issues within the healthcare system because of that, because if nurses get hit, it's their problem. Anywhere else in the world,
Right.
like, you hold the other person
Yeah.
responsible.
Right.
In the hospital setting, when you hear about nurses trying to stand up for themselves, that's what they're talking about. They're the ones being blamed anytime. Like, you did something wrong. You were too
Yeah.
close. You
Right.
shouldn't have. You should have picked up on these social cues. So that was something unexpected that I experienced, and then I got out of it, and I took some of what I had learned in the sales early on in recovery and went back to that. I had done the mortgage thing. I had done a little bit of car sales, and so I eased out of that and transitioned back into car sales, and knew that wasn't something I was passionate about, and I'm like, what's next? And because I was getting where I couldn't do any of those jobs in the hospitals anymore, I was starting to get where I thought I was going and progress into growing up into that industry, but it wasn't the right place. I was still reacting. When I first started, I was great at responding to patients, but now I'm reacting. And the difference is that you're just firing off at your mouth, or you're just putting yourself in bad situations. And so I got into sales, and it ended up being in the roofing industry. It wasn't any passion that I had grown up with. It was just the next right thing. And that's what I've been doing over the past, it seems like 6-7 seasons now, 6-7 years of working in that business. And it also coincides with a big connection between me and Mr. Harley over here. Like, I started riding.
That's okay.
Yeah,
That's what I wanted to ask about. Was the
So
riding.
I started riding like almost around the same time I went back to college to Ohio State, and it was one of those things in recovery of, when's the last time you learned how to do something new that you don't know how to do? And
You said you went back to riding, or you started riding?
when I went back to Ohio State was the same time I started.
started riding.
I didn't
Okay.
grow up riding at all. I
Gotcha.
grew up in a house with 3 women, with
Yeah.
my mom and my 2 sisters.
Yes.
No male figure around.
Yeah, got it.
No wrenching on engines around. Not even a moped.
Got it.
So I always wanted to learn how to ride. I had been around other guys that rode. I was around social events in recovery where riding was a part of it. And it was just a matter of having that adult moment of, here, let's save some vacation time. Let's save a little bit of money and invest in this and learn how to ride and take a class, and then be able to do that and buy a motorcycle and do those normal adult things. And that's been one of the biggest just life adventures, because once I got in, I was hooked. And step by step, just now I'm to the point where it's normal for me, and I never feel lost in the moment of just going from here to Arizona and it can be by myself, or it can be with a group of people, and and planning just adventures and seeing the world. Because I can remember, like, early on, that first year recovery, and we had this family vacation, and I heard other people talking about it in recovery, especially like the young 20-somethings, of, why do my parents feel like I have to pay for my own hotel room when we go on a family vacation? Like, your parents want you to be an adult. Like, and I couldn't
Right.
afford to be an adult. Like, you want to go to Seattle and go spend Christmas out there, or do some family trip out there. But then you expect me to pay for it?
Right.
Like, I got barely enough money for cigarettes and food and pay rent. So to be able to grow up and be able to do that and take on those things and financially be able to do it has been great. It's also given me a great outlet, because for whatever reason in my life, I've never been married and don't have kids. And so this has been my passion in my life, as far as traveling and just seeing the United States. And then probably at some point in time, when I get older and can afford it, to be able to travel beyond the borders. But it's such the greatest feeling in the world to be able to not feel lost. I can be in the middle of nowhere in Arizona or South Dakota, and that's where I'm supposed to be. I'm present in the moment and don't feel lost, as opposed to that feeling I described, that 3 o'clock feeling in the middle of the day, where you feel totally lost and you're riddled with anxiety and depression all at the same time, and you don't know which way is up, and you don't know the solution. And I could be around a group of strangers or around nobody, and
And you're cool with it.
cool with it.
Hell yeah.
Love it.
Ben, what advice would you have for somebody looking to get sober?
Do it. Not to use the Nike slogan, because we're not sponsored by Nike. But
Unless you
Yes.
want to.
Yes.
yes,
Our
just
DMs are open.
Yeah.
just do it. Like, have the courage to put yourself in a situation where you're around strangers that just want to help. That's our only goal. Like, I can remember your early recovery, Matt, and showing up, in certain 12-step meetings at 10 o'clock at night. Like, everybody in there was from a different part of the world, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like, people that would normally not mix. It was a great example of that. And all they were there for was to get sober. Like, there's a problem here, and I just want help.
Yep.
And just put yourself in that situation. And then the biggest thing, I think, is just when you're in that point, that follow that intuitive thought in your head. Have the courage with the thing that you don't want to do it. But you also know that it's a good thing. I'm not talking about, some sort of, thought that you have in your head of like, oh, that's really dangerous, or that's thrill seeking, something like that. I'm talking about, like, I would have these thoughts of like just sending Christmas cards to people, but then I wouldn't do it because then that would be like kind of showing you're weak, or maybe they wouldn't like you getting like you just had a wholesome thought and all you want to do is send a Christmas.
You just thought yourself out of a good idea.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So that's, put yourself around people like that, and then follow that intuitive thought that's kind of pure, like that you haven't had the courage to do before. Because I think that's in everybody. I hope it's in everybody. But that was what always held me back, was not following through, not having the courage to follow that, not having the courage to ask for help, not having the courage just to take care of me and do the loving act of taking care of yourself.
Nice. What advice would you have for somebody new to motorcycling or trying to get into riding?
Ride your ride. That was the biggest thing that I ever heard early on. I would get frustrated with, you had to ride like this, or you had to ride with these people, or you have to be look the part of a biker. And I think one of the people that's since passed away, that was a very small part, but also a very huge part of my recovery during that time when I started riding, was I always looked at this guy. He had been a part of an MC before. He had been a part of that kind of 1% world. And he's now in recovery, and he was just a rider. Like, and there's a difference between a biker and a rider. We all have this Harley notion from the back in the 1970s of long flowing hair. The thing that you want to be. Like, shut the fuck up. When we look at your, when we look at your social media,
dude.
like, it's right there above your head. Come on. Like, you're gonna be this. You're gonna be this Harley badass.
You don't have to be Sons of Anarchy.
Yes, it doesn't have to be that. Like, you just be yourself. And if you got questions, ask. And you don't have to throw on a bunch of leather and ride a Harley. Like, just ride whatever you want to ride and experience it. And you will, if it's for you, you will take it wherever you want to take it. If you're into adventure bikes, and that's probably like the next step for me, is to go out and ride on roads that you can't ride on a big cruiser.
Sweet.
That's where I want to go. I don't know that I'll ever be like, a dirt bike rider, but I want to go and not be around people and go off on old coal mining roads.
Yeah.
Or old mining roads out west. Because I probably go with my friends at least once a year, if not twice a year, out west. And you can only ride so many roads. And you can ride forever, but you're not seeing everything out there. You're only seeing what you can see from the asphalt.
Yeah.
And there's so much more out there. And so that's probably my next challenge. But you ask the question, what do you do to start? You just get on the bike and follow somebody's advice. Ask questions. And because one of the life lessons is if you can't lose, you can't play. And if you pick it apart so much that you think you need to do it perfect the first time, that if you can't do it perfect, you're not going to do it at all. And this is one of the big things in early recovery for me that I had to learn is I wouldn't put myself out there if I couldn't do it perfect. Because I don't want to have somebody see that I'm going to make a mistake. And so you got to learn how to lose in order to play. You got to learn how to make mistakes in order to be a part of. Because you're never going to do it perfect every time, especially if you've never done it before.
Yeah.
I like it.
It's like you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Oh my God! We're gonna end on Kenny. We're gonna end on
this.
Kenny Rogers,
No,
Mr. Milligram.
Ben, you were telling me that the Foo Fighters put on the worst live show you've ever seen, and that Dave Grohl couldn't perform his way out of a wet paper bag. What did you mean by that?
I don't.
It's the Mental Defectives podcast. It's Milligram, Jeremy G. Benjamin is here. We'll see you next time. Peace.